once visible for miles from land, sea, and air. Now, only smoke from the battered Twin Towers looming over New York.
We're at war. There's been an act of war declared upon America by terrorists.
He's not mincing words. George W. Bush prepares America for a prolonged anti-terrorism campaign.
And bagpipes wailing a tribute to men who sacrificed their lives in the line of duty.
From the CNN Center in Atlanta, I'm Elitsa Vasilova.
And I'm Jim Clancy. This is CNN's continuing coverage of America's new war. Well, crews in Lower Manhattan have located a chilling clue. They've discovered a passport belonging to one of the suspected hijackers. It was found several blocks from the crash site, prompting investigators to widen the search area. In another development Saturday, the FBI said it had arrested a second person on a material witness warrant. And meanwhile, rescue, recovery, and cleanup crews are working full steam through the night. The list of the missing has swelled to nearly 5,000. 159 bodies have been recovered from the devastated site. The Justice Department releasing more information about the alleged hijackers and the terrorist network thought to have sponsored Tuesday's attacks. CNN has obtained photos of 8 of those suspected hijackers. From American Airlines Flight 11, which hit the World Trade Center's North Tower, Mohammed Atta, Walid al-Shehri, Abdul Aziz al-Omari, and Walid al-Shehri. From the United Airlines Flight 175, which hit the World Trade Center's South Tower, Marwan al-Shehri. And from United Airlines Flight 93, which crashed in rural Pennsylvania, Saeed al-Ghamdi, Ahmed al-Haznawi, and Ziad Samir Jara.
187 people are now missing and presumed dead in the attack on the Pentagon. U.S. defense officials say the damage to the structure will be in the hundreds of millions of dollars. They say they don't expect to find anyone alive in the rubble. On Saturday, the Pentagon announced the first confirmed death in the attack. Edward Thomas Earhart of Salt Lake, Kentucky, was 26 years old. And the latest on the Pentagon investigation now, 2 suspected hijackers aboard the plane that slammed into the Pentagon were already under U.S. government surveillance. Authorities say one of them was seen on a surveillance tape meeting with the suspect in the bombing of the USS Cole.
The Cole bombing, of course, took place last October in Yemen. Suicide bombers in a small boat pulled up alongside the ship, saluted, and then detonated their charges.
U.S. officials said from the start that they suspected associates of Osama bin Laden. Eileen O'Connor takes a look now at the Cole connection.
They booked the tickets on American Airlines Flight 77 from Washington to Los Angeles on Travelocity, using a New Jersey address, mailboxes, etc. And names U.S. officials confirm were known to them: Khalid al-Midhar and Salim al-Hamzi. Once on board, together with al-Hamzi's brother and an old roommate, a known pilot, they took over the flight, crashing it into the Pentagon. Within minutes, the facade of a symbol of American strength crumbled. As the search and rescue efforts continue, sources say the FBI was informed that Khalid al-Midhar and Salim al-Hamzi were associated with Osama bin Laden and the bombing of the USS Cole. One source confirms they had concrete evidence al-Midhar had met with a man who was later involved in the attack on the Cole.
One was kind of short and the other 2 was tall.
Al-Midhar was a frequent visitor of al-Hamzi and his brother Nawak in the San Diego apartment complex.
They was always together. If they left, it was together. They come back, they're together.
They hung out a lot at the pool, despite telling their neighbors they were studying at a nearby college.
You'll see 3 of them in the pool swimming, or you'll see the dude always looking out the window, another one outside the door on the phone.
At one point, they left, telling one landlord they were in Arizona, living in different cities at different addresses. As it turns out, rooming with another hijacker aboard that plane, Hani Hanjour. Hani attended this flying school, CRM, Cockpit Resource Management, but left without a certification.
He's kind of a waste of time. He wouldn't show up for flights on time, didn't do his homework.
Not a promising student, but skilled enough to carry out the mission. Eileen O'Connor, CNN, Washington.
The U.S. Defense Department is mobilizing to secure potential targets throughout the U.S. Military leaders are calling it Operation Noble Eagle. CNN's Mark Potter joins us now from the Pentagon in Washington. Mark.
Good morning, Relitza. There's a report today in the Washington Post that's causing a lot of interest here at the Pentagon. It says that Pentagon officials were caught by surprise by the hijacked jet that crashed into the building last Tuesday. According to the newspaper, the Federal Aviation Administration told the nation's military air defense command that a hijacked plane was heading toward Washington. That was 12 minutes before the plane hit the Pentagon. Fighter jets were scrambled immediately. But according to the paper, the Washington Post, at the Pentagon, Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld and his top aides were unaware of the potential danger until the impact of the plane. And those in charge of guarding the building were not told and didn't order an evacuation. This morning, a spokesman for the U.S. Air Force would not comment on that report. Now, here at the Pentagon this morning, workers continue to dig through the rubble, searching for victims as they have been doing for several days, 24 hours a day. They're shoring up the building. The search for the victims progresses. And earlier, the Pentagon released another video, a very dramatic video that was shot by a tech sergeant from the Air Force on the day that the plane hit, right after the plane hit, and it shows the building collapsing in on itself in the area hit by the plane. They also released a video showing the inside of the structure, showing the massive damage. It also provides evidence of the human toll, proving, of course, what we know, that people were working here at the time that the plane hit. The jet struck an area of the Pentagon that had just been renovated and had been reinforced, and officials say that was fortuitous because it reduced the damage and may have saved many lives.
This was a terrible tragedy, and people lost their lives. But I'm here to tell you that had we not undertaken this effort in the building, this could have been much, much worse.
Now, the death toll here is believed to be 188. That's 124 personnel from the Pentagon, 64 passengers aboard the airliner. Now, grieving families of the victims were allowed to come by the Pentagon crash site, and they were escorted in. They were brought in buses, escorted by police, and taken care of by military officials. They were allowed to leave flowers and mementos at the site, near the site, and for many it appeared to be a very emotional moment. Meanwhile, the Pentagon prepares to call up 35,000 reservists for what it is calling Operation Noble Eagle, a mission to provide homeland defense and disaster relief. Back to you.
Mark, we heard President Bush telling Americans to prepare for war. There are warnings about risks that lie ahead, not only for the American troops that might be involved, but also for American civilians. What kind of preparations are being made for their protection?
Well, we don't really know that. We know that the Pentagon is working on this issue, of course, as you might expect, but the details are few and far between. We are not getting into any indication that an attack is imminent, but we are being told that the Pentagon expects that it is a mission that could take casualties. That's been a concern in the past, and a reason not to have extended military campaigns. But this time, because this was an attack on the United States, military officials are telling CNN that it is acceptable to receive casualties. It is something that would not thwart them in an extended and long-term campaign. Excuse me. Back to you.
Mark, thank you. And President Bush met with members of his national security team at Camp David Saturday to discuss the U.S. response to Tuesday's attacks. Speaking at the meeting, the president's message was unequivocal.
They will try to hide. We're at war. There's been an act of war declared upon America by terrorists, and we will respond accordingly. And I appreciate very much the American people understanding that.
In his weekly radio address, Mr. Bush said he was planning a broad and sustained campaign, but asked the American people to be patient. Jim.
Relitza, President Bush also said that Osama bin Laden would be, in his words, sorely mistaken if he thinks he can hide from the United States. Mr. Bush also called him the prime suspect, but then later took care to point out other groups may be involved. For more on the Bush team's focus this weekend, let's turn now to Major Garrett. He's in Washington. Major.
Jim, the Bush team's focus is many-layered, multi-dimensional, reviewing target lists, reviewing military options with his top national security advisors. Also, the president is monitoring on a regular basis new developments in the investigation. He met, as you said, this morning with his top national security advisors. Also, the Attorney General, John Ashcroft, all of them providing the latest information to the president. And there's also a very significant effort underway to enlarge the coalition to support this war the president said is about to be declared against global terrorism. There were some encouraging signs for the Bush administration on a couple of fronts on Saturday. One, conversation between the president and Pakistani President Pervez Musharraf to discuss Pakistan's pledge of full cooperation with the United States, including providing vital human intelligence about the possible whereabouts of Osama bin Laden and airspace, should it be required for any military strike the United States might in fact want to carry out within the borders of Afghanistan. Also, the president talked to the presidents of Spain and Mexico, part of his ongoing effort to include other nations in the ever-enlarging coalition the United States hopes to unleash against the perpetrators of the terrorist acts on Tuesday. And in talking to reporters at Camp David, the president said not only that the nation is at war, but that he promised victory in that war.
We're at war. There's been an act of war declared upon America by terrorists, and we will respond accordingly. And I appreciate very much the American people understanding that. As we plan, as we put our strategy into action, we will let you know when we think it's appropriate, not only for to protect the lives of our servicemen and women, but to make sure our coalition has had proper time to be noticed as well. But we're going to act.
Jim, that response from the president was from persistent questions from reporters out at Camp David about the specifics of military options being weighed. The White House has made clear it's not ruling out anything, not ruling out any military option, including the use of ground troops. And there's also a significant statement the president made there about making sure coalition partners are given advance notice. That's significant in part because on Saturday, the Arab League said it would cooperate and support U.S. military efforts provided it receives some advance notice of what those military efforts in fact would be. Jim?
Major Garrett, there's a lot of questions from people that are being called upon in order to participate in that coalition. One of the major questions seems to be, what are the terms that the Bush administration is laying out here? First of all, let's handle this one. There seems to be a sense that there's a take it, you're either with us or you're against us. And there's a sense here that if you don't participate in this coalition, you could find yourself isolated from this administration. True?
Absolutely true, Jim. This is a clear and defining moment the Bush administration sees for those who have been allies of the United States before in a global pursuit of terrorism and those who have not. The administration is arguing that the world changed, not just America, but the world changed on Tuesday. That this attack against the United States could have just as easily been carried out against many other democratic and what the administration would argue civilized nations around the globe. And if you do not join with the United States now, you will forever, at least in the opinion of the United States, be branded as someone who would not step up to the plate, who would not provide the necessary means to support the United States. And the administration makes it very clear, Jim, that it's not just military support that it's talking about. It is support dealing with finances, finding ways to choke off the financial flow to terrorists, not only Osama bin Laden, but others who may be aligned with him. It's also talking about diplomatic isolation. So this works at many layers: military, diplomatic, financial. Secretary of State Colin Powell said today out at Camp David one thing that I think is significant. He said, "We are receiving expressions of support from around the world, and not just rhetorical support." That's been a huge question. Is this support just words and words only? Secretary of State Powell said at Camp David today, "We're receiving real support for whatever may lay ahead in this campaign." A signal the United States, at least so far, is confident that it's not just going to be rhetoric, but real assets, military, financial, and diplomatic, that will come to bear once it starts this campaign against global terrorism. Jim?
Major Garrett, one more question, just briefly. On the other side, there is a concern among the states that are being called into this coalition that the United States has a history of entering these kinds of things, going into areas it doesn't understand, cultures it doesn't understand, and simply not listening to the advice of its allies. Is this administration ready to not only ask them to come into a coalition, but once they're in it, listen to them, to their counsel?
Well, certainly, Jim, every outward statement from the administration indicates that. And when the president calls upon the country for patience and a sense that this is a multi-layered campaign he is about to wage, I think he's trying to get to some of those nuances. Of course, American history, as you said, is replete with examples of very fast, furious U.S. action, sometimes misunderstood, sometimes ham-handed, and oftentimes it happens, the U.S. pulls back, and everyone is left wondering what the ultimate goal was in the first place. The administration knows it's under considerable pressure on the international front to prove that's not going to be the case this time. It's not promising a miracle or perfection, but it is certainly working to assure those who join this coalition that the U.S. effort will be complete, as nuanced as possible, and, as the president said today, effective. Jim?
All right, Major Garrett there reporting from Washington, the latest. Now, former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger saying the attacks show the world can no longer afford to allow countries to shelter and assist any terrorist group. He says the U.S. needs to live up to its word to equally punish those who harbor terrorists, and the response needs to be extensive.
Now that this outrage has been committed, we should not stop until the back of these terrorist networks has been broken.
And now we move on to the latest from the scene of the World Trade Center attacks. We turn to Gary Tuckman in New York, where we've been reporting crews are still in rescue and not recovery mode. Gary.
Ralitza, this is not the first time an airplane is slammed into the tallest building in the United States. The date was July 28, 1945. A U.S. military plane lost in the fog slammed into the 79th story of the Empire State Building, then the tallest building in New York. 14 people were killed. Many people thought history was rewriting itself when they saw a plane smash into the North Tower of the World Trade Center on Tuesday, particularly people over the age of 60 who remembered the 1945 incident. But then another plane slammed into the South Tower of the World Trade Center. People realized this was much different. We're showing you pictures shot by a filmmaker who lives 2 blocks away from the World Trade Center, who stepped out on her balcony after the first plane smashed into the building. It's hard to imagine how frightening this must have been for the people inside the building. A plane flying through the top half of the World Trade Center. You can see, if you look very closely, people waving curtains or clothes or sheets. It's hard to tell. But the horror they must have gone through for some of those people to actually jump out of the building instead of waiting there knowing they were falling to a certain death. Now, we are entering the 6th day of the search, and we have a live picture to show you of the hundreds of workers who are still out there around the clock ever since this all happened Tuesday. 4,972 people are still missing. 5 survivors have been found, but they were all found the day of or the day after. No survivors have been found over the last 3 days. One of the finds made today was very sad and very poignant. A dump truck working on the scene pulled out of the rubble a fire truck that said Ladder 18 on it. It was crushed. It was gray from all the rubble. There was no one inside the fire truck, but we have absolutely no idea what happened to the people, the firemen and or the firewomen who drove that truck to the scene. What we do know is time is running out to find any survivors. And we also wanted to mention to you a sad irony. As we mentioned to you, talking about the Empire State Building to start off this report, once again, the Empire State Building is the tallest building in New York City. Ralitza, back to you.
Gary, how long are they holding out hope that survivors, possibly trapped in some pocket, could make it before they are found?
Ralitza, there's certainly precedent for people surviving for many, many days. We've seen that in earthquakes around the world. People trapped under the rubble and after 8 days come out and are still alive. However, there's also precedent in recent American history that isn't so good. The Oklahoma City bombing. They found survivors the day of and the day after, but they didn't find one survivor after that.
Gary, thank you. Jim.
Well, it was a sad scene, and there's going to be so many more of these funeral services for several victims of the attacks were held Saturday in New York City. Hundreds of firefighters and police attended services for Peter Gansey. He's the chief of the New York Fire Department. Gansey, a 33-year department veteran, and the city's first deputy fire commissioner, also remembered Saturday. William Feehan had spent almost 40 years with the department.
Sad. Fire Department chaplain Father Michael Judge was killed by debris from one of the collapsing Twin Towers. Father Judge was eulogized as someone who, quote, loved to be in a crisis so he could insert God into what was going on.
Police officers, firefighters, even journalists regularly risk their lives doing their jobs, but they're not immune from the emotions of harrowing events like Tuesday's. CNN's Richard Blystone reports on one photographer who escaped death twice in his quest to capture the images of the day.
Surgery is going to keep news photographer David Handschuh away from some friends' funerals, but this one he wasn't going to miss. Because in the line of duty, he saw a lot of Father Mike Judge, the firefighter's chaplain, who was killed Tuesday while giving last rites to a fireman.
He would hold your hand and you would just feel good. He emanated some form of just positive goodwill that nobody else I've ever met could. By just touching you, by putting his hand on you and giving you a hug, you just floated away happy.
Many of those in the overflow crowd had narrow escapes that day. David Handschuh had two.
You hear the sound and then the building starts falling down in slow motion. And I'm a photographer. The initial reaction was to raise the camera and take a picture, but something up here said, just run. And in the 20 plus years I've been doing this, I've never once run from anything. But it probably saved my life. The wall of debris that came flying down just picked me up and threw me a block.
One leg shattered, the other torn up. Firemen pulled him to a delicatessen. Another photographer captured that moment, but it wasn't over.
When the second building collapsed, the facade of that building was blown in. We were trapped once again. Using their hands and tools and sheer strength and will, they pushed their way out.
For news photographers, cameramen, reporters, days like that are part of an unwritten contract with life. So too with soldiers, policemen, firemen, which doesn't make it much easier. But the thousands still missing downtown, they didn't sign up for this.
I'm so sorry that so many people lost their lives over this. It's not comprehensible. It's not right.
At the end, the photographer pulled out his camera. It may not make much of a picture, but this one's personal. Richard Blystone, CNN, New York.
Friends remembered lawyer and commentator Barbara Olson at a service Saturday in Washington. Olson was among the 64 passengers and crew who were killed on American Airlines Flight 77, which crashed into the Pentagon. Olson was a frequent contributor to CNN programs and the wife of the U.S. Solicitor General. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas spoke at the service. He said Olson, quote, strode boldly through life, full of cheer and verve, shying from no challenge or obstacle.
We want to give you now the latest from the crash scenes. Rescue, recovery, and cleanup crews continuing to work throughout the night as they have been at the site of the World Trade Center disaster. Saturday, crews pulled a fire truck that was buried in the debris out. 159 bodies have been recovered from the devastated area so far. No survivors were found again on Saturday. Almost 5,000 people are believed lost somewhere in that rubble. Crews also discovered a passport belonging to one of the suspected hijackers. It was found several blocks from the crash site, prompting investigators now to widen their search of the area. Officials at the Pentagon still assessing the damage there. They estimate it will cost hundreds of millions of dollars to repair that building. Now, massive amounts of manpower are being devoted to what the Justice Department calls the Pint Bomb probe. The investigation is the largest in U.S. history. It involves 4,000 FBI agents and more than 3,000 support personnel.
The family of one suspected hijacker is speaking out. They say they're shocked by Tuesday's tragic events and that the man they knew showed no sign of being capable of such atrocities. Brent Sadler has a story.
A possible White House suicide pilot or the face of an innocent passenger, 26-year-old Ziad Jarrah from Lebanon. The United States Justice Department says he was one of the hijackers on United Flight 93, which crashed in a field some 80 miles from Pittsburgh shortly after 3 other jets struck the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. Flight 93, whose passengers might have wrestled the hijackers, causing the plane to crash, could have been targeting the very heart of America and President Bush himself. In Lebanon's Bekaa Valley, though, Ziad Jarrah's family insists there's no hard evidence to prove any of that.
He never acted or talked in a way that you could have an understanding that he might be related to this.
In Germany, investigators now say the Technical University in Hamburg, with its now closed prayer room, is where Jarrah and 2 other alleged hijackers studied. Mohammed Atta, whom US authorities believe was aboard the first plane to hit the World Trade Center, and Marwan al-Shihi, flying in the second aircraft to hit the Twin Towers. Ziad Jarrah's family are Sunni Muslims, well-educated and well-to-do. They spoke of a young man whose personality, they claim, does not fit the profile of an Islamic fundamentalist bent on terror.
He has his girlfriend, he goes to nightclubs, he drinks sometimes. His way of life can't be related to these parts.
Ziad Jarrah's way of life away from home started in Germany. He began to study engineering 4 years ago on courses paid for by proud parents. Around a year ago, he told them he was in the United States, taking part in a Boeing Aircraft Corporation seminar related to his studies. After that, he returned to Hamburg, receiving more help from his parents to study. When he later told them he was in Florida training as a pilot, they assumed all was well. His last call home came 2 days before the suicide attacks, when he thanked his ailing father for sending more money. His apartment manager says he paid cash weekly for 1-bedroom accommodation and presented a German passport with a student visa. On May 2nd this year, he obtained a Florida driver's license. The same day, another terrorist suspect, Mohammed Atta, got his Florida driver's license. The only time he raised concern, they say, is when his Turkish girlfriend told them she thought he might have gone with friends to Afghanistan while they were separated for several weeks. The family says there's no proof of any trip to Afghanistan and are willing to cooperate with the international inquiry.
What happened is a tragedy, a catastrophe for all people, and we don't agree on these acts, and we are surprised and shocked of what happened.
The Lebanese authorities are stressing that neither the government nor its people at large have any link with the terror attacks against America, regardless of suspicions focused on one of its citizens, standing ready